Hi, my name is Mark McGrath. I live in Howardsport, and today we're going to talk about a story in history. This is the site of the Cedar Bank Links golf course. It is no more, but I was on a hike around the Salt Pond Marsh, which is behind us, and our hike leader mentioned three words: Bobby Jones, Francis we met, and golf course. And I became intrigued. So the first thing I did was come up to the visitor center here and seek out the National Seashore historian, Bill Burke. Bill, can you start us off describing the course and a little bit of the history?
Sure. In the 1920s, believe it or not, an 18-hole golf course was developed in the area that you're seeing off in the background, in and around the Salt Pond and Nauset Marsh. And the course must have been beautiful. The course crisscrossed the channel that you see behind you a couple of times, and it was just a links course that utilized the beautiful natural topography of the land. And the course operated from the late 20s up until right after World War II.
Thank you.
Are we ready?
We're ready.
Okay, Mark McGrath and Don Sparrow.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Jen. These are just some pictures. Here's where we are. You can see the visitor center there. The golf course is in purple. You can see the Coast Guard beach over on the right. Here are just some pictures, some snapshots of the beautiful area around here. If you take a walk down in the lower part behind the visitors center here, you'll see a roller just sitting there, and near it a sign that says from 1928 to 1935, this was the golf course. In 1928, the Boston Evening transcript said this is one of the finest natural layouts in the world. This one, you can read that. There was a book by Daniel Wexler, who's a noted golf writer, and he wrote a book on all the great courses, not all of the great courses, but some of the great courses that had disappeared over the years. Cedar Bank Links is featured in this book. The two people that played the most part in putting this presentation together is Don, of course, and the park historian, Bill Burke. Also, Don has written a number of articles for local newspapers on Cedar Bank's Links. He's published a book. So a few of the stories you've already heard, but Don has a lot more, and it's published in this book, and he does have a few copies at the end of we'll show you at the end of the session.
The book, I've written 6 books. I've published 4. The first one, Growing Up in Cape Cod, is a lousy title, but it's probably the best book. The best title was the book I helped my wife write. She's French, and she grew up in Paris. Her mother was an unwed mother who had 3 daughters by a count, who couldn't marry because he was already married. But when his wife died, Genevieve, my wife, was 14, so we adopted her, so she became a countess. And then when the Germans approached Paris, she and her mother got on their bikes and headed south to escape the Germans, so they lived off the land for a month, being strafed and bombed and all that. So the title of the book is The Bastard Countess and the War. The book sells for $15, but we're discounting it. It's 10 years old, so we're discounting it for $5. Very good book.
And that's right. One other digression. You know, remember the story about Genevieve in the...
When I first started, Genevieve was my second wife. My first wife died in 1993, and her husband died about the same time, so we met. And I invited her out for dinner once at Hearth and Kettle, big deal. And I had my 2 grandchildren with me, 5 and 7, and Maya and Perry, and they were horsing around, jumping up and down and sliding under the table. So finally I said, "Come on, you kids, why can't you behave? Why can't you be dignified like Genevieve?" So they sat like this. And pretty soon they began to giggle, and I turned around, and there was Genevieve sliding under the table. you don't want to tell the whole Johnson story.
Go ahead.
I worked at the Howard Johnson stand here in Orleans, where the Lost Dog pub is now. It was a wonderful place to work then. There were lots of young people who always go skinny dipping after work or drive to Hyannis for a cup of coffee at the Mayflower Cafe. And the story that our late, the waitresses, my first wife was working there with me, Rita, and the waitresses would discuss their tips and their income, and they decided that their income was subject to the size of their bosoms. So one of the flat-chested ladies bought herself a magnificent set of falsies. Wore them, and she claimed that the first week her income doubled. The falsies bothered her because the nipples were very large. So one day, she hauled up the falsies and cut off the nipple. Two of the waitresses fainted.
Does anybody want to hear about golf? A great source of, I feel like it's, how can I follow this? A great source of pictures and history is the Eastham Town Hall. And downstairs they have a conference room and with all of the old golf pictures of the course. And when I discovered these, somebody else told me about them. I went running to Don and said, Don, you should see the pictures they have downstairs in the Eastham Town Hall. And he said, I know, I gave them to him. and that happens all over. If you go to the Historical Society, they'll have the same story. Here's some additional information on Don. He was born in a house just off the bike trail. He was raised on his father's farm, pulling turnips and cutting asparagus. Don was a good student and received a double promotion during grammar school. As he mentioned, he got a scholarship to Exeter and Harvard, and then he received his master's in chemical engineering at MIT. He traveled the world as a consultant for Arthur D. Little. In retirement, he had multiple careers. He was a public servant, being chairman of the Board of Selectmen and various other commissions. He was an author, writing 4 books. He was a woodcarver. Over a sip of bourbon, he would quote long passages from Shakespeare and other poets. He wrote articles for local papers, gave talks, and told stories. He was quite an accomplished man. Don, tell us a story. Quincy Adams Shaw built the course starting in 1925, but the family had owned the property on which the course was built as a seasonal hunting and fishing retreat for a number of years. Let's go back a couple of generations. Robert Gould Shaw, a wealthy Bostonian, was close friends with John Quincy Adams, the 6th president, and therefore he named his son, one of his sons, Quincy Adams Shaw Sr. And Quincy Adams Shaw Sr. made a fortune in copper mines in northern Michigan. He was the highest taxpayer in Massachusetts. His wife, Pauline Agassiz, founded the first kindergarten school in the country, and she built that system and kept it for 20 years, funding it, until she turned it over to the Boston school system. Quincy Adams Shaw Jr. had a first cousin named Robert Gould Shaw. At 25, he was appointed a full colonel in the Union Army in the Civil War. He commanded the 54th Regiment, which was the first black regiment fighting for the Union forces. He was killed in the Battle of Fort Wagner at 25. His life was depicted in the movie Glory, starring Matthew Broderick, Denzel Washington, and Morgan Freeman. It received 3 Academy Awards and depicted this wonderful Union soldier. Quincy Adams Shaw Jr. was the gentleman who built this course. He was born in 1869 and lived till he was 91 in 1960. He was a Harvard graduate. He was an NCAA tennis champion in doubles while he was playing for Harvard. and he became a finalist in the U.S. Open tennis tournament. But unfortunately, later in life, he spent 10 years in the McLean Mental Hospital. When he got out, the doctors told his parents and friends, if you want this gentleman to recover, what you should do is find him a task that will never end and will be all-consuming. They decided to build a golf course around the family hunting retreat in Eastham. Here's more about Quincy Adams Shaw from Don Sparrow.
Mr. Shaw was a wonderful guy. He had some peculiarities. He didn't like electricity in his house, so he had kerosene lamps and icebox. He didn't like telephones, so we had to use our family telephone, which is about a half a mile away from the cottage. And it was always a wonderful thing when we had to take messages up to the big house, because we always get a piece of chocolate or a piece of fruit, which is the biggest oranges we'd ever seen. It was wonderful. And one of his other peculiarities was he didn't like to break in shoes. So his feet were the same size as my father, so he'd give the shoes to my father. Wear them for a couple of weeks, and then Mr. Shaw would use them. He didn't buy expensive cars. He usually bought DeSotos, but the roof on the DeSoto was too low, and he didn't like to take off his Homburg hat when he got into the car, so when he bought a new DeSoto, he'd have the roof raised 6 inches.
Well, here is Quincy Adams Shaw on the left, Francis Ouimet, and Bobby Jones playing Cedar Banks. And there they are practicing on the green. Francis Ouimet on the left and Bobby Jones striding in the middle there. Another picture of Bobby Jones. Bobby Jones again. And here are the caddies. Now, which one is Don? Don had to be in the back row. And he is the second from the right in the back row. What were you, about 12 then? Here's an aerial layout, an aerial picture taken by Fairchild. They were one of the big aerial photographers at the time. And that's the course looking north. That is the Quincy Adams Shaw House. And this is the view looking over towards Route 6. Route 6 runs just under those lakes, and the salt pond is over on the right. Some of the holes. Okay, here are the actual holes of the course. Don, will you describe hole 15?
The house on 15 was owned by a friend of Mr. Shaw's, Mr. Matthew Luce, and when the crash came in '29, he lost everything, and he needed money, so Mr. Shaw bought the house, but allowed Mr. Shaw to live there for the rest of his life. But when he's naming the holes, he named number 15 my house.
As a reminder to Mr. Luce. So you can see, for you golfers, the course was 6,490 yards, which is a decent layout even now. Doesn't compare to the long hitters courses of today. To get to play the course, this was a private course. It wasn't a private club. It was a private course that he owned. There was no membership. You got there to play if you're his friend. And a Mrs. Frances Sullivan wanted to play there and wrote him a letter. He talked about you can play 6 holes. Cars may be parked in the hollow to the left of the number 18 tee. And at the end, he writes, please carry this enclosed tag with you, and you will understand that this invitation is for your personal play only, except that you may ask a guest who resides 20 miles from Eastham and who is staying with you. So he really didn't want any locals to play the course. You had to be his friend. This house is still lived in by a family named Smith, who was a descendant of Quincy Adams Shaw. And in their house, they have this book, and I put the golf club on it just to detect the size. And every weekend, they had a tournament, kept score in this book. And there's a ledger with the people who played. And here's the entry with Bobby Jones and Francis Ouimet playing. They both shot a 72 that day. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the history of the course. The two people who played it, the two famous people. Francis Ouimet, 1893 to 1967. The 2013 US Open will be the 100th anniversary of Ouimet's victory. He won the US Open as a 20-year-old. I know of two caddies. One caddied with him 100 years ago, and Don caddied for him in the 1930s. So that's a nice connection there. I ran across this article of the 20 most improbable victories in US sports. Francis Ouimet's victory in the US Open ranks 3rd. And I looked up and it was behind a blind man climbing Mount Everest. And I think number 2 was the US hockey team in the '60 Olympics. And after that, it was Francis Ouimet's victory in the Open. He beat Harry Varden, who was still a noted, one of the best golfers in British history. There's Francis in his older years, and this is Francis and his caddy. His caddy that he had hired was caught playing hooky and couldn't take the time to play the caddy. So this 10-year-old volunteered and said, "I'm your caddy." I don't think he knew anything about golf, but he carried his bag. There is Francis in the middle with Harry Varden and a guy named Ray. This was depicted in what I think is a good movie, The Greatest Game Ever Played. And here are a few excerpts from that movie. Okay, to get into the US Open,
Cut line 76. 6 holes to make up 4 shots.
if you didn't hear that,
Just made 6 straight birdies. I did. Congratulations, lad. You're in the Open.
did you hear that? Okay, good. That was the qualifying round for Francis to get into the US Open. 6 straight birdies to finish it off.
What is it? What's wrong?
In the Open itself,
birdies. I did?
after 4
Congratulations,
rounds,
lad. You're
Ray
in
and
the
Varden were in at a score of, I don't know what it was, but they were tied. Francis had to sink this putt on 18 to tie them at the end of the tournament.
I'll be damned.
There will be an 18-hole playoff tomorrow between Varden, Ray, and Mr. Ouimet to decide the championship.
The putt for the championship. The movie, of course, for Hollywood has a lot of subplots to it, a little bit of a love story, his parents, so forth. It's a movie. Okay, the following year, Harry Barden won his 6th British Open, a record which stands to this day. And although he died in 37, he is still considered the greatest English player of all time. Francis and Eddie remained friends for their entire lives. Little Eddie the caddy grew up to be quite tall. But he, in later life, ran a car dealer, owned a car dealership, and he became a millionaire. Francis, we met, became a prominent businessman. He went on to win 2 American amateur titles and became the game's most admired ambassador. Okay, Bobby Jones played here. And this is quite a record. He won the Grand Slam in 30, the 4 major tournaments. He won 13 majors. But look at in the US Open, he won in 11 of them. 4 firsts, 4 seconds, a 5th, 8th, and 11th. That's not bad. US Amateur, 13 of them. What's that, 5 firsts, couple of seconds, couple of semifinals, and the rest were quarterfinals. British Open, went in it 3 times and won it 3 times. And then he retired at 28. He went on. He did a little work in Hollywood. If you look at the Golf Channel, every once in a while you can see this is a film of Bobby. The swing looks a little bit dated, but watch him get into the ball on his downswing. Boy, that's a beautiful finish, isn't it? He went on, he had some, I think, neurological problem, and although he lived till, I think, 70s, he didn't play much golf in his later years. Okay, let's get back to the golf course. This is the layout, as it was laid out by Quincy Adams Shaw around Salt Pond. And the exercise I went through is I took that drawing, put it in Photoshop, colored it in, erased the background, and then took the background over to Google Earth. And that's the first hole as it looks on today's topography. Then you do that 18 times, and that's the layout of the original Cedar banks on today's map. Let's take a look at, there's a walking path that goes through the woods down here. And I spent a fair amount of time on that. And the red is the recordings of my GPS as I took those walks. And then I was looking for some greens and some sand traps. And those little dots there in text show where you can actually see the depressions in the ground that were once sand traps. And those are available, you can see those right from the trail. The course is on 3 good sections of private property. And I went to the owners of the property, and somebody told me Adam, Austin Smith is the gentleman who owns the Shaw House now. And I went up and saw him, and before he could push me off, I said, Don Sparrow sent me. He suggested I come and talk to you. And that was my in to talk to Mr. Smith and take some of the pictures that you'll see in a couple of moments. But it is all on private property, which is off limits to the national park hikers. And that shows, that red hike is just a delightful walk. The brown are the private property areas. Let's look at some of the holes. The first hole, as we see it, here is the picture from that aerial photograph before. The first hole is down here. It went up beside a garage. The green was up on top of a hill with a sand trap there. But it looked like, although it was a long hole, it looked fairly open. Here's the hole today. That's standing at the same place on the tee. If you hit maybe a 7-iron, you can land near the garage or maintenance shed. And then it's about another 90 yards up into those trees to get the pin. And there's our caddy, Don Sparrow, waiting for us to land the ball near the green. So that's what the first hole looks like today. Once we laid it out, it's nice to know a little bit about a history, but now that you know there's a golf course there, we said, let's play it. To play it, we took a tip from Harry Barden there in the dress code, and here's the group we assembled to play the course. That's my wife, Patty, who's sitting back there somewhere, and some golfing buddies. We all have ties on. Some of us have old clubs. And there's Don giving his instructions to Jim Ferry. And this is quite a career Don has had. He started caddying when he's 12, and he's 92 now, so he's had an 80-year caddying career. Okay, the ninth hole. The ninth hole is at the end of the parking lot. The tee originally was behind a little pond that's now a marsh, and as you go around the corner at the end of the parking lot, you can see it. And you played up to the green, which is right out the front door here. That's the fairway as it is today. When I first looked at it, I said, no, we'll have to get here at 7 a.m., and we did to play.
I'm gonna hit a low one.
Okay.
We played the temporary green. You get good roll in the parking lot. And Patty, this is you.
I got it. I got it.
Second shots, we took preferred lies. There's Jay putting out on the first, and Don's holding the flag there. Just a little side story on, when we showed up at 7, I thought I'd be here before anybody started work. But the people that work here start early. And as we were about to tee out, a car pulled in, right in the middle of the fairway. I asked them to move. And the person that works in there said, do you have a permit to do this? And I said, no, we're only going to be 5 minutes, we'll be out of here. Then Bill Burke, the historian, came by, and he looked at us and said, what are you guys doing? I said, we're playing golf. He said, can you take my picture with Don Sparrow? So thanks to Bill. Bill had a good attitude. Let's look at another hole. This is the 14th. And this is around the marsh. You hit your long par 3 over the corner of the water. This is the view. That's a quite common view from out here. And the green is up behind that boathouse there. This is Luce's house, number 15 that he talked about before. Mr. Luce was president of Exeter or headmaster at?
Well, Mr. Luce was a registrar at Harvard at one point in his career. Also, he's a very good friend of Dr. Lewis Perry, who was the headmaster of Exeter Academy.
But that's Mr. Luce's house. He still has the garage that was another maintenance shed for Cedar Banks. That's the view from his front porch, looking down to the green, and there's Don caddying, holding the pin on the green again. Nice view. Also from this hole, you can see that house across the pond, and that's the Richardson home. That's where Elliot Richardson lived. So that's his house that you can see from the walk. This is playing the hole. Oh, look at this swing. Hank Jansen. And putting out. Here's the hole Don was talking about, the 11th. The tee was up on a bluff. You had to hit the ball across the water to the green on a different bluff. So we had to play this. That's the tee as it is today. So we created a temporary tee. That's my shot. In the water. And then to simulate the scow that Don talked about, we had a rowboat take us across.
They're recreating.
And that's Hank getting a little bit confused with the roast.
And then trip over there and get in a boat and pull themselves over.
And in the background, you can hear the gallery.
Cedar Banks Golf Course. Cedar Banks Golf Course.
How long ago?
In 1924.
Oh my.
Now, the nice thing about the shot I put in the water, the shellfish game warden was there to retrieve my ball. That might be the first time a ball was ever retrieved with an oyster picker. And there's Hank. It turned out we had arranged this, playing these few holes. The shellfishing is open like 2 hours a month. And we were right in the middle of that. And the game warden was wondering, why are you hitting golf balls into all the people that are shellfishing here today? But he turned out to be a real good sport. And we finished the hole, and there's Don on the green as it looks today. And we did have a club championship, and the winner was Jay Kennedy because he's the guy that owned the boat. And they were paying Don his usual fee, which was how much? I think we over-tipped.
What's the question?
How much did the caddies get in those days?
A buck, a dollar a round. And sometimes you caddy double and you get $2 a round. And usually we caddied in the morning and the afternoon, Saturday and Sunday, so it was a very good, profitable weekend for us.
I don't know if Don mentioned, but his father built the course and was the superintendent, and his mother was the caddy master. And Don's house was just about on the property also. And there was us celebrating with coffee afterwards, and there's the thing at the Chocolate Sparrow. Do you think there's any connection? It's Don's son and daughter-in-law that own the Chocolate Sparrow. So, name Sparrow endures. And just a brief look at some of the all-world holes that we couldn't play. Number 10 starts right behind the clubhouse, goes around the pond, it's long. How much are you going to bite off for your drive and second shot? A real challenging hole. This is standing looking right out the back here. We'd be on the 10th tee, the 10th green, you go around the pond, the 11th tee is on that bluff, the 11th green is over there, etc. The 17th was a great hole. This was a double dog leg. You hit over the brook, get in the boat, rowed across, and had to play around that pond. And that was quite a challenge. How much do you cut off on your shots to get near the pin? And that's where the hole looks today. And that bridge is out. This is a nice complex. And this is the reason that when people ask, why didn't he make it a private club? Well, that's his house right there in the middle. And the 4th tee was out his back door. The 1st tee was out his front door. The 18th green was out the front door, and the 3rd green was right at the corner of his house. And the players, when they came through, would stop and have coffee or have a few drinks in the house. And that's all he wanted on the course. And here's Don on the 3rd green, Don caddying on the 18th green. This is the house as it looks today, which is pretty well preserved from what it was before. And I didn't notice when I was in there, but they say that the floor still has the spike marks on it from the golfers going through to the kitchen and refrigerator. That's Austin Smith and Don. As a summary, there's a clip of this CD set that describes every course on
Well,
Cape
it started
Cod.
in 1925. It was built by Mr. Quincy Adams Shaw, who was a very wealthy Bostonian, and my father helped build it. He was employed by Mr. Shaw. The only earth-moving equipment they had was our horse Jerry and an iron scoop. Francis Ouimet was a friend of his. I think Francis Ouimet helped him to design the course. Ouimet was down here almost every weekend, and everyone wanted to play with him, of course, so he gave them all a chance. I caddied when Bobby Jones played. Well, my brother caddied for Bobby Jones. I did not. He was a marvelous gentleman, really just a superb person. And I can still remember his swing. It was just almost boneless, just syrup. And he gave my brother the ball that he used on that round. I caddied almost every weekend, and players sometimes, if they would say, well, I've never hit a good drive with this club, and if I don't do well this time, you can have the club. And I acquired this mashie, which is crafted at Octoloni St. Andrews. It's a wooden shafted club, and I'm very pleased with it. Mr. Shaw, as the years went on, he grew older, as we all do, and he began to lose interest. Of course, just went back to nature, so it had a short life.
Okay. The course was around until about 1955. I've heard of people playing it as late as then, and then the National Park took it over about 1959. They said, okay, this is going to be National Park, and then the National Park formally started in '62. Thank you all for coming. That's the story of Cedar Bank Links. It's nice to have some connection to the land when you visit a beautiful place like this. Maybe the next time you visit Nauset Marsh, you can think of what the area was like 80 to 100 years ago. Don Sparrow growing up and pulling turnips and cutting asparagus just over the hill, or Bobby Jones and Francis Ouimet teeing off from right here in back of the Visitor Center and playing around Salt Pond. Or maybe just reflect on the National Seashore and how its creation saved this spectacular area for all of us to enjoy.